Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the military training ground, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the rifle. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty terrain, and the distant mountains seemed to mock her with their imposing presence. She had always been different from the other recruits, smaller in stature, quieter in demeanor, but what burned inside her was a fire that few could understand. The other soldiers gathered around, their voices carrying on the wind like vultures circling their prey. Lieutenant Jackson, a towering man with arms like tree trunks, stepped forward with a smirk that had become all too familiar to Sarah over the past months of training. Well, Martinez, Jackson drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. I hear you think you can handle the long-range challenge. You know what the record is, don't you? 3,800 meters. That's over 2 miles, sweetheart. Men twice your size have tried and failed. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on the distant target range. She had heard this speech before, variations of it, from different people in different places. Her whole life had been a series of people telling her what she couldn't do, what she wasn't capable of, what wasn't meant for someone like her. The other recruits began to gather closer, sensing the entertainment that was about to unfold. There was Rodriguez, who had barely made it through basic training himself, but never missed an opportunity to put others down. There was Thompson, whose father had been a decorated sniper and who believed that talent was something you inherited, not earned. And there was Williams, whose laugh was as sharp as broken glass and twice as cutting. Come on, Martinez, Rodriguez called out, adjusting his cap with theatrical flair. You can barely hit the broadside of a barn at 500 meters. What makes you think you can handle the big leagues? Thompson nodded in agreement, crossing his muscular arms over his chest. My old man always said that precision shooting isn't for everyone. It takes a special kind of person, someone with the right build, the right mindset. No offense, but you're just not built for this kind of thing. Sarah had been born in a small town in New Mexico, where the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and the sound of gunfire was as common as the morning rooster's crow. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had been a mechanic who supplemented his income by hunting, and he had taught Sarah to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle properly. But those early lessons had been about putting food on the table, not about precision, not about the kind of shooting that required mathematical calculations and an understanding of wind patterns, elevation, and atmospheric pressure. When Sarah announced her intention to join the military, her father had been supportive but worried. Her mother, Elena, had cried for 3 days straight. Mija, her mother had said through her tears, the world is hard enough for people like us. Why do you want to make it harder for yourself? But Sarah had something to prove, not just to the world, but to herself. She had grown up watching her parents struggle, watching her father work double shifts just to make ends meet, watching her mother clean houses for wealthy families who barely acknowledged her existence. She had sworn that her life would be different, that she would find a way to rise above the circumstances of her birth. The military had seemed like the perfect opportunity. It promised education, training, a chance to serve something greater than herself. But from the moment she had arrived at boot camp, she had been reminded at every turn that she was different, that she didn't belong, that she was taking up a space that could be filled by someone more suitable. Now, standing on this training ground with the mountains watching silently in the distance, Sarah felt the weight of every doubt that had ever been cast upon her. But she also felt something else, something that had been building inside her for months, years even. It was a quiet determination, a refusal to be defined by other people's limitations. Lieutenant Jackson continued his monologue, enjoying the attention from the gathered soldiers. You see, Martinez, shooting at extreme distances isn't just about pulling a trigger. It's about understanding ballistics, compensating for wind drift, calculating bullet drop over vast distances. It's science and art combined, and it takes years to master. He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in. The current record holder spent 15 years perfecting his technique. He grew up on a ranch in Montana, spent his childhood hunting elk and deer across mountain ranges. He understands the land, the weather, the way sound travels across open spaces. He's 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighs 220 pounds, built like a mountain himself. Sarah knew about Marcus Sullivan, the legendary sniper whose 3,800-meter shot had become the stuff of military folklore. She had read every article about him, studied every interview, watched every training video she could get her hands on. She knew that he had made his record-breaking shot during a training exercise in Afghanistan, under perfect conditions, with a custom-modified rifle that cost more than most people's cars. But she also knew something that the others didn't seem to understand. She knew that precision shooting wasn't just about size and strength. It was about patience, about understanding your own body, about becoming one with your weapon and your environment. It was about silence, both external and internal. Williams stepped forward, his laugh echoing across the training ground like a coyote's howl. "Hey, Martinez, maybe you should start with something more your speed, like the pistol range. Or better yet, maybe the kitchen. I hear they need help with meal prep." The gathered soldiers erupted in laughter, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. But she had learned long ago that showing emotion only gave her tormentors more ammunition. Instead, she took a deep breath and looked Lieutenant Jackson directly in the eye. "I want to try," she said simply, her voice steady despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside her. Jackson's smirk widened. "You want to try? Do you have any idea what you're asking for? This isn't some carnival game, Martinez. This is serious military training. If you miss, if you embarrass yourself out there, it reflects on all of us." Sarah's mind wandered back to a conversation she had had with her grandfather just before he died. Eduardo Martinez had been a quiet man, a former farm worker who had spent his entire life being underestimated and overlooked. But he had possessed a wisdom that came from decades of watching and listening and learning. "Mija," he had told her, his weathered hands holding hers with surprising gentleness, "the world will try to tell you who you are and what you can do. But you are the only one who gets to decide what's true. When people laugh at your dreams, it usually means your dreams are big enough to matter." Standing now in the dust and heat of the training ground, surrounded by the laughter and skepticism of her fellow soldiers, Sarah felt her grandfather's words like a warm hand on her shoulder. She straightened her spine and looked around at the faces surrounding her. "I understand the risks," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I understand that the record is 3,800 meters. I understand that I don't look like the typical sniper. But I also understand that understanding something and doing something are two different things." Thompson shook his head in disbelief. "You're serious about this, aren't you? You actually think you can break a record that stood for 5 years?" Sarah nodded. "I don't just think I can break it. I know I can." The laughter that erupted from the group was louder this time, more vicious. Rodriguez slapped his knee dramatically. "She knows she can. Did you hear that? She knows." But Lieutenant Jackson was studying Sarah with new interest. There was something in her eyes, something in the way she held herself, that made him pause. He had been training soldiers for over a decade, and he had learned to recognize certain qualities that couldn't be taught or faked. He saw determination, yes, but also something deeper. He saw the quiet confidence of someone who had been underestimated their entire life, and had learned to use it as a weapon. "All right, Martinez," he said slowly, his tone becoming more serious. "Let's say I'm willing to entertain this fantasy of yours. What makes you think you have what it takes? What's your experience with long-range shooting?" Sarah had been preparing for this question her entire military career. "I grew up in New Mexico, sir. My family hunted for survival, not sport. I learned to make every shot count because we couldn't afford to waste ammunition. I've been shooting since I was 8 years old, and I've never missed a shot that mattered." "Never missed a shot that mattered," Williams repeated mockingly. "That's a pretty claim, Martinez. But hitting a deer at 200 yards is a little different from precision shooting at nearly 4,000 meters. Sarah turned to face Williams directly. "You're right. It is different. It's much harder, which is why I've been training for it every single day since I arrived here. While you've been in the barracks telling jokes and playing cards, I've been studying ballistics tables. While you've been sleeping in on weekends, I've been on the range at dawn, learning to read wind patterns." The mockery in Williams' expression faded slightly, replaced by something that might have been surprise. "You've been training on your own time?" "Every spare moment I have," Sarah confirmed. "I've been working with Sergeant Peterson in the armory. He's been teaching me about different ammunition types, rifle modifications, scope adjustments. I've been keeping detailed logs of every shot I've taken, noting weather conditions, temperature variations, humidity levels." Lieutenant Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Peterson? He hasn't mentioned this to me." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I asked him not to. I wanted to be ready before I made any formal requests. I didn't want to waste anyone's time if I wasn't serious about this." The training ground fell silent for a moment, the only sound the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The other soldiers exchanged glances, their easy mockery beginning to waver in the face of Sarah's quiet determination. Rodriguez was the first to break the silence. So what? So you've been playing around on the range. That doesn't mean you're ready for the real thing. The pressure alone would crush someone like you. But Sarah was remembering another conversation, this one with her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson. Sarah had been a senior, applying for military scholarships, and Mrs. Patterson had been trying to convince her to consider other options. Sarah, Mrs. Patterson had said, her voice full of well-meaning concern, I just want to make sure you're being realistic about your goals. The military can be a very challenging environment for young women, especially young women from backgrounds like yours. Maybe you should consider community college first, get your feet under you. Sarah had listened politely, but inside she had been burning with frustration. Background like hers. What did that mean exactly? That because her parents were immigrants, because they didn't have money, because she hadn't grown up with privilege and connections, she was somehow less capable, less worthy? She had joined the military partly to prove Mrs. Patterson wrong, partly to prove her own worth to herself, but mostly because she had a vision of who she could become, and she was willing to work harder than anyone else to make that vision a reality. Now, facing the skeptical faces of her fellow soldiers, Sarah felt that same burning determination. She understood their doubt. She had been fighting against doubt her entire life. But she also understood something they didn't. Doubt could be a tool, if you knew how to use it. You want to know about pressure? She asked Rodriguez, her voice calm, but intense. I've been living under pressure my entire life. Pressure to represent my family with honor. Pressure to prove that someone like me belongs here. Pressure to show that hard work can overcome any disadvantage. She looked around the circle of faces, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. You think this shot would be hard for me? You think the pressure would be too much? Let me tell you what pressure really is. Pressure is watching your father work 16-hour days because he's afraid to ask for a raise. Pressure is translating for your mother at parent-teacher conferences because the school doesn't have Spanish-speaking staff. Pressure is knowing that every mistake you make reflects not just on you, but on everyone who looks like you. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. Look, Martinez, nobody's questioning your work ethic or your background. We're just saying that precision shooting at extreme distances requires certain physical and mental attributes that what? Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp for the first time. That I don't have because I'm small? Because I'm a woman? Because I'm Mexican-American? Because I didn't grow up in some ranch in Montana with a silver spoon and a custom rifle? The silence that followed was thick with tension. Sarah realized she had revealed more anger than she had intended, but she didn't regret it. Sometimes anger was necessary. Sometimes it was the only thing that could cut through years of accumulated doubt and condescension. Lieutenant Jackson stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. Martinez, I think you might be misunderstanding our concerns. This isn't about your gender or your background. It's about the fact that attempting a shot like this without proper preparation could be dangerous, not just for you but for everyone on this range. Sarah nodded, appreciating his more measured tone. I understand that, sir. Which is why I'm not asking to attempt the full distance today. I'm asking for the opportunity to demonstrate my current capabilities and to receive the training necessary to attempt the record safely. This seemed to catch Jackson off guard. You want formal training? I want the chance to prove that I'm worth investing in, Sarah said simply. I want the opportunity to show that with proper instruction and support, I can achieve something that seems impossible. Williams laughed again, but it sounded more nervous now, less confident. And if you can't? When you fail, what then? Sarah smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Then, I fail knowing I gave everything I had. But I won't fail. Because failure isn't an option for people like me. We don't get second chances. We don't get the benefit of the doubt. We have to be twice as good to get half as much recognition. She paused, letting her words sink in. But that's okay. Because being twice as good means that when we succeed, when we prove everyone wrong, it means something more. It means that every other person who's been told they're not good enough, not strong enough, not the right type, can look at what we accomplished and know that they can accomplish it too. Rodriguez shook his head slowly. You really believe this, don't you? You actually think you can do this? I don't think it, Sarah replied firmly. I know it. Because I've already done the impossible once. I made it through basic training when half the people here thought I would wash out in the first week. I qualified expert marksman when some of you still can't consistently hit center mass at 300 meters. I've already proven that what people think I can't do and what I actually can do are two very different things. Lieutenant Jackson was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah with new respect. Finally, he spoke. All right, Martinez. Here's what we're going to do. You want a chance to prove yourself? You'll get it. But We're going to do this the right way, step by step. Sarah's heart began to race, but she kept her expression neutral. What do you mean, sir? I mean that if you're serious about this, really serious, then we're going to treat it seriously. No more solo practice sessions. No more informal conversations with Sergeant Peterson. If you want to attempt a record-breaking shot, you're going to receive proper training, proper equipment, and proper supervision. The other soldiers exchanged surprised glances. Thompson spoke first. Sir, are you seriously considering this? Jackson nodded slowly. I am. Martinez has made some valid points, and she's shown more dedication to this goal than I initially realized. If she wants to pursue this, she deserves the opportunity to do it right. Williams stepped forward, his expression incredulous. But, sir, the current record holder is Marcus Sullivan. He's a legend. He's everything a precision shooter should be. Martinez is, well, she's what, Williams? Jackson's voice carried a warning edge. Williams backpedaled quickly. I just mean, she doesn't fit the typical profile for this kind of shooting. Maybe that's exactly why she might succeed, Jackson replied. Maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. Maybe precision shooting isn't about fitting a profile. Maybe it's about something else entirely. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Lieutenant Jackson, but she also felt the weight of new responsibility. He was giving her a chance, but with that chance came expectations and pressure that went beyond anything she had faced before. Sir, she said carefully, what exactly would this training entail? Jackson smiled, and, for the first time, it wasn't condescending. Martinez, if you're going to attempt to break Marcus Sullivan's record, you're going to need to understand everything about precision shooting at extreme distances. Ballistics, meteorology, physics, psychology. You're going to need to become an expert not just in shooting, but in all the sciences that support long-range precision. He paused, his expression becoming serious again. And you're going to need to be prepared for the fact that when word of this gets out, and it will get out, you're going to face scrutiny and skepticism from far more people than just the soldiers standing here today. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. I'm prepared for that, sir. Are you? Jackson asked. Because once we start down this path, there's no backing out quietly. If you succeed, you'll be making history. If you fail, it won't just be your failure. It will become ammunition for everyone who believes that certain people don't belong in certain roles. The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She understood that this was bigger than just her personal goals now. She would be representing every woman who had ever been told she wasn't strong enough, every person from a working-class background who had been told they didn't have the right pedigree, every minority who had been told they didn't fit the profile. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility, Sarah felt energized by it. This was what she had been preparing for her entire life, even when she hadn't realized it. Every time she had been underestimated, every time she had been dismissed, every time she had been told she couldn't or shouldn't or wouldn't, she had been building the strength and determination she would need for this moment. I understand the stakes, sir, she said finally. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. Lieutenant Jackson nodded approvingly. Good. Then, we start tomorrow morning at 0500. Be prepared for the most intensive training of your life, Martinez. If you're going to attempt the impossible, you're going to need to become impossible yourself. As the group began to disperse, Rodriguez called out one last time. Hey, Martinez. You know what? I hope you prove us all wrong. But I still think you're crazy. Sarah turned back to look at him. And, for the first time since the conversation began, she allowed herself to smile with genuine warmth. Rodriguez, being crazy enough to believe in the impossible is what separates dreamers from achievers. I'd rather be crazy than safe. As she walked back toward the barracks, the sun beginning to set behind the distant mountains, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror coursing through her veins. She had just committed herself to something that seemed impossible, something that would test every limit she had ever discovered about herself. But, as she thought about her grandfather's weathered hands and her father's calloused fingers, as she remembered her mother's tears and Mrs. Patterson's well-meaning doubts, as she recalled every moment when someone had tried to define her limitations for her, Sarah knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, she would start the journey toward either the greatest triumph or the most spectacular failure of her life. But, tonight, for the first time in months, Sarah Martinez fell asleep without the weight of doubt pressing down on her chest. Tonight, she slept the deep, peaceful sleep of someone who had finally found their purpose. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 0430, but Sarah was already awake, staring at the ceiling of the barracks. She had barely slept, her mind racing with anticipation and nervous energy. Today would mark the beginning of the most challenging period of her military career and possibly her entire life. She slipped quietly out of her bunk, careful not to wake her sleeping roommates, and made her way to the shower. The hot water felt good against her skin, but she kept it brief, knowing that Lieutenant Jackson valued punctuality above almost everything else. By 0500 sharp, she was standing outside the specialized training facility, dressed in her combat utilities and ready for whatever the day would bring. Lieutenant Jackson arrived precisely on time, carrying a large duffel bag and wearing an expression that was equal parts serious and curious. Behind him walked a man Sarah didn't recognize, older and weathered, with the kind of quiet confidence that spoke of years of experience in dangerous places. "Martinez," Jackson said by way of greeting, "I want you to meet Chief Warrant Officer David Chun. Chun is our senior instructor for precision marksmanship and ballistics. He's also the person who's going to determine whether you're actually ready for this challenge or whether we're all wasting our time." Chun studied Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything about her posture, her expression, her readiness. "Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that hinted at childhood years spent somewhere far from the American Southwest. "Lieutenant Jackson tells me you think you can break Marcus Sullivan's record. Tell me why." Sarah had been expecting this question, but hearing it asked so directly still caught her off guard. "Because I believe that precision shooting isn't just about physical attributes or background, sir. I believe it's about dedication, understanding, and the willingness to push beyond what seems possible." She nodded slowly. "That's a good answer. But it's also what I'd expect any ambitious soldier to say. Let me ask you something more specific. What do you know about ballistic coefficients?" A ballistic coefficient is a measure of a projectile's ability to overcome air resistance in flight, Sarah replied immediately. "It's determined by the bullet's mass, diameter, and shape. Higher coefficients mean the bullet retains velocity better over long distances and is less affected by wind drift." Chin's eyebrows rose slightly. "And what about the Magnus effect?" Sarah took a deep breath. She had studied this extensively during her solo preparation. The Magnus effect occurs when a spinning projectile experiences a force perpendicular to its direction of travel due to the interaction between the bullet's rotation and the air flowing around it. It can cause significant deflection at long ranges, especially in crosswind conditions. "Impressive," Chin said, and Sarah could hear genuine surprise in his voice. "You've been doing your homework. But theoretical knowledge and practical application are two different things. Follow me." He led them to a building Sarah had never been inside before, a specialized facility that housed some of the most advanced marksmanship training equipment on the base. The main room was dominated by a series of computer terminals and what appeared to be the most sophisticated rifle simulator Sarah had ever seen. "This," Chin said, gesturing to the equipment, "is where we're going to start. Before you ever touch a real rifle for this training, you're going to understand every single variable that affects a long-range shot. Wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, temperature gradients, humidity levels, barometric pressure, Earth's rotation. Even the curvature of the planet becomes a factor at extreme distances." Sarah's head was already spinning, but she nodded eagerly. "I'm ready to learn, sir." "We'll see," Chin said. "Lieutenant Jackson, if you'll excuse us, I'd like to work with Martinez alone for the first few hours. I need to assess her baseline knowledge and learning capacity before we proceed." After Jackson left, Chin pulled up a chair next to one of the computer terminals. "Martinez, I want you to understand something from the beginning. What you're attempting to do isn't just difficult, it's exponentially more complex than anything you've done before. The difference between shooting at 500 meters and shooting at 3,800 meters isn't just distance. It's an entirely different discipline." Sarah settled into the chair next to him, her attention focused completely on his words. "I understand that, sir. I'm prepared to learn whatever I need to learn." Chin pulled up a ballistics program on the computer screen. "Let's start with a scenario. You're attempting a shot at 2,000 meters. Standard 7.62 millimeters NATO round, 175 grain boat tail hollow point. Temperature is 70 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 50%, no wind. What's your elevation adjustment?" Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing through calculations. She had studied tables and formulas, but applying them in real time was different. "Approximately 32 minutes of angle elevation." Chin nodded approvingly. "Close. 33.2 MOA. Not bad for a first attempt. Now, same scenario, but at a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind from the right. This was more complex. Sarah knew that wind drift wasn't linear, that it affected bullets more at the end of their flight path when they were traveling slower. Wind drift would be maybe 18 inches to the left. 24.7 inches, Chen corrected. But your thinking is on the right track. The key is understanding that wind doesn't affect the bullet uniformly throughout its flight. The last third of the trajectory is where you see the most dramatic effects. For the next 2 hours, Chen ran Sarah through increasingly complex scenarios, each one building on the last. She found herself struggling at first, but gradually began to see the patterns, to understand the relationships between different variables. Chen was a patient instructor, explaining not just what the corrections should be, but why they work that way. The thing about extreme long-range shooting, Chen explained as they worked through a particularly challenging wind calculation, is that it requires you to think like a meteorologist, a physicist, and an engineer all at the same time. You're not just aiming a rifle, you're calculating the path of a projectile through a three-dimensional environment that's constantly changing. Sarah absorbed every word, taking detailed notes and asking questions whenever she didn't understand something completely. She was beginning to realize that her months of solo practice, while valuable, had only scratched the surface of what she needed to know. Around mid-morning, Chen introduced her to the rifle simulator. This system can replicate the exact conditions of any shot, anywhere in the world. We can simulate Marcus Sullivan's record shot, down to the specific weather conditions and terrain features that existed that day. The simulator was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The rifle felt real in her hands. The scope provided incredibly detailed imagery of distant targets, and the computer calculated bullet performance in real time based on her inputs and trigger control. Let's start with something simple, Chen said, adjusting the system parameters. 1,000 meters, ideal conditions, no wind. This should be well within your current capabilities. Sarah settled into the shooting position, adjusting the rifle to fit her smaller frame. This was something she had worried about during her solo training. Most precision rifles were designed for larger shooters, and she had to make adjustments to achieve proper positioning and sight alignment. She took her time, applying the breathing techniques she had learned, allowing her heart rate to settle between breaths. The crosshairs settled on the target, and she applied steady rearward pressure to the trigger. The simulated shot was a hit, just slightly off-center. Not bad, Chen observed. Your fundamentals are solid. But watch your follow-through. You're lifting your head slightly just after the shot breaks. At extreme distances, that kind of movement will translate to significant target misses. They spent another hour on the simulator, with Chen identifying and correcting small technical issues that Sarah hadn't even realized she had. He was a master instructor, able to diagnose problems with just a few shots and provide specific corrections that yielded immediate improvements. During a brief break, Chen shared some of his own background. I grew up in San Francisco, son of immigrants from Taiwan. My father ran a small electronics repair shop, worked 16 hours a day just to keep us afloat. When I joined the army, nobody expected much from the skinny Asian kid who looked like he should be fixing computers instead of carrying a rifle. Sarah looked at him with new interest. How did you get into precision marksmanship? Stubbornness, mostly, Chen said with a slight smile. I was assigned to an infantry unit where I definitely didn't fit the typical mold. But I discovered that I had a natural aptitude for the technical aspects of shooting. While other soldiers were focused on physical training and combat tactics, I was studying ballistics tables and weather patterns. Did you face skepticism like I am? Chen's expression grew serious. Martinez, what you're facing is nothing compared to what I went through. This was 20 years ago, before the military had become as open to diversity as it is today. There were people who made it very clear that they didn't think someone like me belonged in a combat role. How did you deal with it? The same way you're dealing with it now. I let my performance speak for itself. I became better than anyone expected, better than most people thought possible. And, eventually, the skeptics had to acknowledge that maybe their assumptions were wrong. After the break, Chen introduced Sarah to more advanced concepts. He showed her how to read wind patterns by observing grass movement and dust swirls at multiple distances. He taught her about temperature inversion layers and how they could affect bullet trajectory in unexpected ways. He explained the importance of shooting position consistency and how tiny variations in body position could lead to massive target misses at extreme ranges. The human body is not a machine, Chen explained as they worked on shooting position modifications. It's inconsistent by nature. Your heart rate varies, your muscle tension changes, your breathing affects your natural point of aim. Precision shooting is about learning to work with these inconsistencies, not against them. Sarah found herself struggling with some of the physical demands of the modified shooting positions Chun was teaching her. The precision rifles used for extreme long-range shooting were heavy, and maintaining stable positions for extended periods was more challenging than she had anticipated. This is where your size might actually be an advantage, Chun observed as she worked through a particularly difficult prone position. Larger shooters have more muscle mass, but they also have more muscle tremor. Smaller shooters can often achieve greater stability once they learn to use their body mechanics efficiently. By afternoon, word had begun to spread around the base that Sarah was receiving specialized training for a potential record attempt. During lunch in the mess hall, she could feel eyes on her from every direction. Some looks were curious, others skeptical, and a few were openly hostile. Rodriguez approached her table with Williams and Thompson in tow. "So, Martinez, how's the super soldier training going? Learning how to be 6 feet tall and bulletproof?" Sarah looked up from her meal, maintaining her composure despite the irritation she felt. "Actually, I'm learning that success isn't about fitting someone else's expectations. It's about understanding the science behind what you're trying to achieve and being willing to work harder than anyone expects." William snorted. "Science? It's shooting a rifle, not building a rocket ship." "At 3,800 meters, it's both," Sarah replied calmly. "The ballistic calculations alone require understanding physics concepts that most people never encounter. Add in meteorological factors, human physiology, and equipment variables, and you're dealing with a system that has hundreds of interconnected variables." Thompson leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "You're saying that all this technical knowledge makes up for physical limitations?" "I'm saying that physical attributes are just one component of a complex system. Marcus Sullivan isn't the record holder because he's big and strong. He's the record holder because he understands every aspect of precision shooting better than anyone else, and because he's willing to put in the work necessary to execute perfectly under pressure." Rodriguez shook his head. "You're really drinking the Kool-Aid, aren't you? They've got you convinced that this is actually possible." Sarah set down her fork and looked directly at him. "Rodriguez, let me ask you something. What's the longest confirmed shot you've ever made?" Rodriguez's confident expression faltered slightly. That's not really relevant." "It's completely relevant. If you're going to sit here and tell me what's possible and what isn't, I think we should establish what your expertise is based on." Thompson stepped in. "She's got a point, Rodriguez. Your longest confirmed shot is what, 600 meters? "It was a difficult shot," Rodriguez said defensively. "High wind, moving target." "I'm sure it was," Sarah said without sarcasm. "And I'm not diminishing your accomplishment. But I think you can understand that someone who's made a 600-meter shot might have a different perspective on what's possible than someone who's spent months studying the science of 4,000-meter shots." Williams looked uncomfortable. "Look, Martinez, we're not trying to be your enemies here. We just think you might be setting yourself up for a really public failure." "Maybe I am," Sarah acknowledged. "But the only way to find out is to push forward and see what happens. Failure is always a possibility, but regret from not trying is a certainty." That afternoon, Chun introduced Sarah to the actual rifles she would be training with. They were custom-modified precision instruments, unlike anything she had worked with during her regular marksmanship training. The rifle that would be used for the actual record attempt was a .338 Lapua Magnum, a massive weapon that dwarfed the standard-issue rifles she was familiar with. "This system weighs 28 pounds fully loaded," Chun explained as he helped Sarah adjust the rifle to her frame. "The scope alone costs more than most people's cars. Everything about this weapon is designed for one purpose: delivering a projectile to an exact point at an extreme distance." Sarah struggled initially with the weight and bulk of the system. The rifle was nearly as long as she was tall, and finding comfortable shooting positions required significantly more adaptation than she had anticipated. "Don't fight the rifle," Chun advised as she worked through various positions. "Learn to work with it. The weight that seems like a disadvantage now will become an advantage once you understand how to use it. A heavier rifle is naturally more stable, less affected by small movements and muscle tremors." They spent hours working on position modifications and shooting fundamentals specific to the heavy precision system. Chun was endlessly patient, making small adjustments to Sarah's position and explaining how each change would affect her shot consistency at extreme ranges. "Precision shooting at this level is about creating a repeatable system," Chun explained as they worked. Every aspect of your shooting process needs to be identical, shot after shot. Your breathing pattern, your grip pressure, your sight alignment, even the way you think about the shot. Any variation, no matter how small, gets magnified exponentially at long distances. As the day progressed, Sarah began to feel the enormous scope of what she was attempting to learn. The technical knowledge alone was overwhelming, and she hadn't even begun to work on the mental aspects of performing under the kind of pressure she would face during an actual record attempt. "Chan," she said during a brief rest period, "can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. Do you think this is possible? Do you think someone like me can actually achieve this?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. "Martinez, I've been doing this for a long time. I've trained some of the best precision shooters in the military, and I've learned that success at this level isn't really about natural talent or physical attributes." He paused, looking at the massive rifle lying on the table between them. "It's about obsession. It's about being willing to dedicate yourself completely to understanding and mastering every single aspect of the discipline. It's about having the mental toughness to push through failure after failure until you achieve something that most people would consider impossible. Do you think I have that obsession?" Chen smiled. "Martinez, you've been here for 10 hours today. You've absorbed more technical information than most people learn in weeks of training. You've shown more dedication to this goal than I've seen from soldiers who've been shooting competitively for years." He stood up and began packing away the training equipment. "Do I think you can break Marcus Sullivan's record? I honestly don't know. But I do know that if you maintain this level of commitment, if you're willing to push yourself beyond what you think your limits are, then you have as good a chance as anyone." As Sarah walked back to the barracks that evening, her head spinning with ballistic calculations and technical concepts, she felt both exhausted and exhilarated. The magnitude of what she was attempting was becoming clearer with each passing hour, but so was her determination to succeed. She thought about her conversation with Chun about obsession. Was she obsessed? She considered the question as she fell into her bunk, her muscles aching from the day's training. She thought about the hours she had spent studying ballistics tables while her fellow soldiers relaxed. She thought about the mornings she had spent on the range while others slept in. She thought about the way she felt when people laughed at her ambitions, and the fire that their skepticism lit inside her. Yes, she realized. She was obsessed. But it wasn't an unhealthy obsession born of ego or desperation. It was the obsession of someone who had found their purpose, who had discovered something worth dedicating themselves to completely. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow's training. There was so much more to learn, so many more skills to develop, so many more limits to push beyond. But for the first time since she had announced her intention to attempt the record, she felt truly confident that she was on the right path. The skeptics and doubters could continue their mockery. Sarah Martinez had worked to 2.3 weeks into her intensive training. Sarah's world had shrunk to a universe of ballistic tables, wind patterns, and the precise mechanics of breathing and trigger control. Every morning began at 0445 with physical conditioning specifically designed for precision shooters, followed by hours of technical instruction, simulator work, and live fire exercises that pushed her skills incrementally toward the extreme distances that had once seemed impossible. The word about her training had spread throughout the base and beyond. Sarah had begun to notice strangers watching her during meals, pointing her out to their companions, whispering conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. The attention was simultaneously flattering and unnerving, but she had learned to channel the pressure into focus. Chief Warrant Officer Chun had become more than just an instructor. He had become a mentor who understood the unique challenges of exceeding expectations while carrying the weight of other people's assumptions. Under his guidance, Sarah's understanding of precision shooting had evolved from basic marksmanship to something approaching art and science in equal measure. Today, Chen announced as they assembled at the range on a crisp morning in late October, "We're going to attempt your first shot beyond 2,000 meters. You've demonstrated mastery of the technical concepts, your simulator scores have been consistently excellent, and your live fire performance at shorter distances has exceeded expectations." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. 2,000 meters would represent a significant milestone in her journey toward the 3,800-meter record. It was also the distance at which precision shooting transitioned from difficult to genuinely challenging for even experienced marksmen. Lieutenant Jackson had joined them for this session, along with Sergeant Peterson from the Armory and Master Sergeant Williams, the senior non-commissioned officer responsible for marksmanship training across the base. The presence of senior personnel indicated that Sarah's progress was being monitored at higher levels than she had realized. Martinez, Master Sergeant Williams said as they prepared the equipment, "I want you to understand that what you're attempting today represents a significant step forward. Very few soldiers on this base have successfully engaged targets at this distance, and none have done so during their first attempt." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of expectation but also a calm confidence that had been building throughout her weeks of preparation. "I understand, Master Sergeant. I'm ready." The target range had been specially configured for the extended distance shot. Weather monitoring equipment had been positioned at 500-meter intervals along the range to provide real-time data about wind conditions at different points along the bullet's flight path. High-powered spotting scopes were positioned to allow the instructors to observe the impact and provide immediate feedback. Sarah approached the .338 Lapua Magnum rifle with the ritualistic care that Chen had taught her. Every aspect of her preparation followed a precise sequence that had been practiced until it was automatic. Equipment check, position setup, range estimation verification, weather data analysis, ballistic calculation, mental preparation, and, finally, execution. "Wind conditions are favorable," Chen reported as he monitored the weather station readouts. "Variable breeze from the southwest, averaging 8 miles per hour at our position, increasing to 12 miles per hour at the target. Temperature is 72 degrees, humidity at 45%. Barometric pressure is 29.95 inches, and steady." Sarah absorbed the information, running the ballistic calculations in her head while simultaneously adjusting her scope settings. The mathematics that had once seemed impossibly complex had become second nature through weeks of intensive practice. She could visualize the bullet's trajectory, account for wind drift, and compensate for all the environmental variables that would affect the shot. The rifle settled into her shoulder with familiar weight. Sarah had grown accustomed to the massive precision system, learning to use its heft as an advantage rather than fighting against it. Her shooting position had evolved through countless hours of practice into something that maximized stability while remaining comfortable enough to maintain for extended periods. Through the scope, the target appeared surprisingly small despite its actual size. At 2,000 meters, even a large target seemed to shrink to almost nothing, a reminder of just how precise her shot would need to be. Sarah controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to settle into the slow, steady rhythm that Chun had taught her to cultivate. The crosshairs settled on the center of the target, and Sarah began her final trigger sequence. The process was meditative, almost spiritual in its focus and intensity. Everything else in the world faded away until there was nothing but the rifle, the target, and the space between them that her bullet would need to traverse. The shot broke cleanly, the rifle's recoil absorbed smoothly by her properly positioned body. Through the scope, Sarah maintained her sight picture, watching for the bullet's impact. At 2,000 meters, the time of flight was nearly 3 seconds, long enough to create suspense, long enough for doubt to creep in. "Hit!" called out Sergeant Peterson from behind one of the spotting scopes. Center ring, slightly high and right, but well within acceptable parameters. Sarah felt a surge of elation, but maintained her composure. One successful shot didn't prove anything, and she knew that Chin would expect her to repeat her performance before claiming any real achievement. "Good shot," Chun said as she prepared for her second attempt. "But let's see you do it again." Consistency is what separates lucky shots from genuine skill. The second shot was even better than the first, striking dead center in the target's bullseye. The third shot was equally precise. By the time Sarah had fired her 5th consecutive hit at 2,000 meters, the observers were exchanging looks of genuine surprise and respect. Master Sergeant Williams approached as Sarah was clearing the rifle. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. When Lieutenant Jackson first told me about your goals, I thought he was indulging in ambitious but unrealistic fantasy. What I just witnessed suggests that maybe the fantasy is becoming reality." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she was already focused on the next challenge. "Master Sergeant, 2,000 meters is impressive, but it's still 1,800 meters short of the record. I know that those last 1,800 meters are going to be exponentially more difficult than anything I've done so far." "That's exactly the right attitude," Chen interjected. "Success at intermediate distances can be misleading. The environmental factors that have minimal impact at 2,000 meters become overwhelming obstacles at extreme distances." Over the following days, Sarah continued to push her maximum effective range incrementally outward. 2,200 meters, 2,500 meters. Each increase in distance brought new challenges and required adjustments to her technique and understanding. At 2,500 meters, Sarah encountered her first significant failure. Despite perfect conditions and flawless execution of her shooting process, her shots were consistently missing the target entirely. After an hour of frustrating attempts, Chen called a halt to the exercise. This is where mental toughness becomes as important as technical skill, he explained as they analyzed the failed session. At extreme distances, there are days when everything goes wrong despite perfect preparation. Learning to deal with failure and maintain confidence is crucial for ultimate success. Sarah felt frustrated and defeated, but Chen's words reminded her that setbacks were part of the learning process. What do you think went wrong? Chen pulled out his data sheets and weather readings. Honestly, nothing. Your shooting was flawless, your calculations were correct, your equipment was functioning perfectly. Sometimes the environment just isn't cooperative, no matter how well we think we understand it. So how do you deal with that during a record attempt? You don't get to deal with it, Chen said bluntly. During a record attempt, environmental conditions are what they are, and you have to make it work regardless. That's why Marcus Sullivan's achievement is so remarkable. He didn't just make a difficult shot under perfect conditions. He made an impossible shot under whatever conditions existed on that particular day. This sobering conversation marked a shift in Sarah's training. Chen began introducing variables designed to simulate the unpredictable conditions she might face during an actual record attempt. Wind patterns that changed dramatically during the bullet's flight time. Temperature variations that affected bullet performance. Equipment malfunctions that required rapid adaptation. Real-world shooting isn't conducted under laboratory conditions, Chen explained as Sarah struggled with a particularly challenging scenario. You need to be prepared for everything to go wrong at exactly the wrong moment. Meanwhile, Sarah's growing reputation had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. During a routine training session, she was surprised to see a small group of visiting officers observing from a distance. Chen explained later that word of her progress had reached division level, and senior commanders were curious about the unusual recruit who was attempting to rewrite the record books. No pressure, Chen said with a wry smile. But you're representing more than just yourself now. There are people at very high levels who are interested in seeing whether the military's traditional approach to precision shooting might benefit from some fresh perspectives. Sarah understood the implications. Her success or failure would be viewed as a test case for whether the military should reconsider its assumptions about who could excel at precision marksmanship. The responsibility was daunting, but it also provided additional motivation to succeed. The psychological pressure of carrying these expectations manifested in unexpected ways. Sarah found herself overthinking shots that should have been routine, second-guessing decisions that had previously been automatic. Her performance began to suffer, and Chen recognized the signs of someone struggling with the mental aspects of high-level competition. Martinez, he said after a particularly poor shooting session, we need to talk about what's happening inside your head when you're behind the rifle. They spent an entire afternoon working on mental preparation techniques, visualization exercises, and strategies for maintaining focus under pressure. Chen introduced Sarah to sports psychology concepts that were rarely discussed in traditional military marksmanship training. Precision shooting at the highest level is 90% mental, Chen explained. The physical skills become automatic with enough practice. What separates champions from everyone else is their ability to perform under pressure, to maintain focus when everything is on the line. Sarah learned breathing techniques designed to control anxiety and maintain optimal physiological conditions for accurate shooting. She practiced visualization exercises that allowed her to mentally rehearse perfect shots before attempting them physically. Most importantly, she learned to recognize and interrupt the negative thought patterns that could destroy her confidence at critical moments. The mental training proved as challenging as the technical instruction had been. Sarah discovered that controlling her mind was far more difficult than controlling her body, but gradually she began to develop the psychological tools necessary for peak performance under pressure. 3 weeks later, Sarah achieved another milestone, her first successful shot at 3,000 meters. The achievement felt monumental, bringing her within 800 meters of Marcus Sullivan's record and proving to herself that the impossible was becoming possible. But Chen was quick to temper her celebration. 3,000 meters is impressive, but it's important to understand that the difficulty doesn't increase linearly. Those last 800 meters might be harder than everything you've accomplished so far combined. Sarah was beginning to understand what he meant. Environmental factors that were manageable at shorter distances became dominant influences at extreme ranges. Wind patterns that could be compensated for at 3,000 meters became unpredictable chaos at 3,800 meters. The margin for error shrank to virtually nothing. Additionally, the physical demands of the training were taking their toll. Sarah's body was adapting to the requirements of precision shooting, developing new muscle memory and endurance, but the extended sessions behind heavy rifles in uncomfortable positions were exhausting in ways that regular military training hadn't prepared her for. This is where your background might actually be an advantage, Chen observed during one particularly grueling training day. Soldiers who've had easy lives don't always know how to push through genuine discomfort. You've been dealing with challenges your entire life. Sarah appreciated the perspective, but she was also realistic about her limitations. The physical demands of extreme precision shooting were significant, and she was constantly working to improve her strength and endurance to meet them. The most significant challenge, however, was dealing with the growing attention her training was receiving. Media outlets had somehow learned about her record attempt, and requests for interviews were beginning to flood through official channels. Sarah found herself torn between wanting to maintain focus on her training and recognizing the opportunity to inspire others who might be facing similar challenges. The publicity is a double-edged sword, Lieutenant Jackson explained during a briefing about media requests. On one hand, your story could inspire young people, particularly young women and minorities, to pursue goals they might otherwise think were impossible. On the other hand, media attention creates additional pressure that could affect your performance. Sarah thought about the young girl she had once been, watching her parents struggle and wondering whether someone like her could ever achieve something significant. She remembered the guidance counselors and teachers who had tried to steer her toward more realistic goals. She thought about all the other young people who might be facing similar discouragement. "I want to do the interviews," she told Jackson, "but only after I attempt the record shot. Win or lose, I want my performance to speak for itself before I start talking about it." Jackson nodded approvingly. "That's probably the wisest approach. Let's focus on the training for now and worry about publicity later." As November approached, Sarah's training intensified further. Chen began conducting sessions designed to replicate the exact conditions she would face during her official record attempt. The pressure was building from multiple directions: her own expectations, the attention from senior military leadership, the growing media interest, and the knowledge that she was carrying the hopes of everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. But through it all, Sarah maintained her focus on the fundamentals that Chun had drilled into her from the beginning: technical mastery, mental preparation, physical conditioning, and, above all, the obsessive dedication to perfection that separated elite performers from everyone else. During a late-night phone call home, Sarah's mother asked her a question that cut to the heart of everything she was attempting. "Mija, what happens if you don't break the record? What if all this training doesn't lead to success?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "Mama, success isn't just about breaking records. Success is about pushing yourself to discover what you're truly capable of. Even if I don't break Marcus Sullivan's record, I've already proven to myself that I can achieve things that most people thought were impossible." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "And what if you do break the record?" Sarah smiled, even though her mother couldn't see her through the phone. "Then, I prove that limitation is often just another word for lack of imagination. And maybe other people who've been told they can't do something will realize that they probably can." As she hung up the phone and prepared for another early morning of training, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that day on the training ground when she had first announced her intention to attempt the impossible. The skeptical laughter of her fellow soldiers seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the focused intensity of preparation for something that was beginning to seem achievable. The record attempt was still weeks away, but Sarah could feel herself approaching the culmination of everything she had been working toward. The technical skills were in place, the mental preparation was ongoing, and the physical conditioning was reaching peak levels. All that remained was to prove that sometimes the impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been done yet.